Good morning, welcome to MCC Culinary Arts beef demonstration. Today we are going to be learning how to tie meat using the half hitch method. I'm also going to be cleaning and breaking down a whole beef tenderloin into different fabricated cuts. And we are going to show you guys how to grill a tomahawk ribeye and a New York strip. Awesome. So first today we are going to start with a whole beef tenderloin, and this still has the majority of the fat, some of the tough tendon and cartilage, which we're all going to remove, and then we're going to break it down into different fabricated cuts. So here I have a beef tenderloin, which I have already taken out of its packaging as well as rinsed to remove any extra blood. One thing that's very important when working with meat after you wash it is to make sure it's good and dry so it's not sliding around on your work surface. So I generally just reserve one towel for that. So here, this is the top portion. This portion here is where all the rib bones were connected, and you can see that in the indention. So in our lecture today, we talked about meat should always be served presentation style up, which would be this top part, which is our pretty part. Now, we've got to take all this stuff off. A lot of times, some of this can come off just by pulling it, like this little piece did. Other times, you need to get in there with your knife. So it's a little bit of a combo, but you don't ever want to take away too much good meat. So anything that you can separate and pull off with your hands is great. Because you're leaving the meat intact. So that's how I always start, is by using my fingers with gloves on to separate that and see if I can't pull any of it off. Okay, and what that did was it removed the entire chain. There is this little chain of meat that can be used when rendering down for fat. You could cut this up into fajitas. You could also use this to be ground down into ground chuck or hamburger meat. Today we're gonna make an Italian country meatball as well as a meatloaf, so we could grind that down and use it for that. So I'm going to reserve that and put it here instead of in my scrap bowl. Now that I've pretty much gotten off what I can with my hands, I am going to use what we call a fillet knife here. It's a little bit flexible, it's got a very sharp tip, and I am going to come right along the side and get the rest of that chain off. That's going to be the first step. Making even, smooth cuts, and I'm going to trim that piece off. And again, we can grind that up for hamburger meat or anything like that. And then I'm going to remove this extra fat along the edge here. Okay. Now I've got to get all this stuff. I've got to get all this little connective tissue off. And again, as I'm pulling it with my fingers, I'm preserving the meat a little bit, but I got to get under here. So I'm going to start right here on this little piece so you can see the technique. You take the tip of your knife and gently slide it. And instead of cutting directly across, lift your blade a little bit and go down along the meat just like so, and then pull this back. A lot of times you can pull it with your hands. Other times you need the knife for assistance. So we're going to now work on this big section. Just gently going up underneath the fat to expose the good meat, and I'm gently making small cuts as I pull to remove that. Okay, want to get all of this off, so any little pieces that were left behind, we'll pull. Okay, now we're going to work on getting this little bit off here. Should be relatively easy. And see, that'll just peel right off mostly. And one important reason why I'm doing that is because I'm trying to leave a nice smooth surface here instead of a surface that looks like I have sawed at the meat. That's the goal. So it's better to work in small sections, especially as you guys are learning, so that you get the hang of it and you can still end up with a nice cut. One thing that's super important is that you're always cutting away from yourself and never towards your body in case the knife were to slip. Okay, so you see I'm getting most of that off. I'm leaving a little bit. That's okay, because as I say in class all the time, fat is flavor, flavor is love, and that's what makes our food good. So I'm going to leave a little bit, but I am going to get off this tough part right here at the top. And then just use my knife to gently cut that away. And as you can see, I'll turn the meat so you guys can see here. I'm cleaning up all of this on the interior. So I'm going to go in and slice. Sometimes it helps to remove any little gunk you have built up on your knife as well. And I'm actually doing this backwards so y'all can see. It's a little easier when it's facing towards you. All right, so now we have a nice clean tenderloin on the top. It's okay to leave a little bit of this fat because, like I said, that's flavor and love. But we do need to break this down a little bit better. And you also want to flip it over and pull off any little bits of fat or pieces of meat that might be hanging off so that it cooks evenly. We still have a little bit of that tough silver skin right there. Just exposing a little bit of that marbling. And I really want to make sure I get off this right here. And this is a lot of fat with a little bit of meat, so I'm also going to put that over there so we can grind it up into ground chuck. And then as you can see, there's just a little bit of that silver skin. So I'm just going to pull it with my hands as best I can. Move that little piece of fat. And one more small piece of silver skin. This tenderloin's a little bit longer than my board, so I'm having to move it around a little bit. Don't be scared to manipulate the meat and adjust it on your board as you need it to make it easier to cut. That is totally okay to do. So now I've got this nice clean piece, but I have this section up here. We are making something today called a Chateaubriand, and this is the top portion of the fillet, or of the beef tenderloin, okay? So right here where I have this lip and where it looks a little bit different, I'm gonna make a smooth cut all the way through, separating that. This is where I'm gonna cut my fillets and my tender tips, as well as some of my thin slices here, or cutlets. And then we're gonna clean this up too. And we tie that. So what we do here is, let me move this out of the way for a moment. We're gonna take this cap off and pull it back, because the Chateaubriand is meant to be a very tender cut with not a lot of fat. It's roasted. It's got some clarified butter on it, so we're adding some fat back into it. You can leave a little bit. and that's okay in there. But what's really important is this has all these loose little pieces of meat that come together as one. So you want to tie this off. And I'm gonna show you guys that in just a moment after I finish breaking down this into tender tips and into a fillet. I'm gonna change my gloves really quick, give a clean little wipe down so I'm working with a clean space, which is always important. Okay, putting on fresh gloves. So things like beef stroganoff is a great example. We are going to be making that today in our lab. So we need tenderloin tips in order to do that. So we are going to cut off this end portion and cut it into very thin little strips, and then down from there into smaller pieces. And this is called MCCs. And these are small, tiny little pieces of beef. This is for beef stroganoff, beef stew, or any sort of meat where you need, or any sort of dish where you need a bite-sized meat. We're gonna pass that off to our student. From here on the part that's not so fat, this fat, nice, thick part, this is for our center cut fillets, y'all, okay? So we're gonna cut those there, but our cutlets are thinner and a little bit smaller in size, so we're gonna start on the end that's a little bit more narrow and a little bit more thin to cut the cutlet. Everything should be the same thickness when you're cutting the cutlet, the same as the fillet. These can be pounded down for any type of hamburger steak or medallion that you may want to serve. And then here we're gonna cut center cut fillets. So we're gonna do 3 nice fat fillets out of here. This would be 8 to 10 ounces each. And then you turn them up on their side. You've got a little bit of marbling, but a fillet, unlike a ribeye, is a much leaner cut of meat because it has very little fat. Okay? And in reference to that, I would like to show you guys what some really good marbling and fat looks like. This here is a tomahawk ribeye, okay? It's bone in, so that's a section of the rib. You can see that the bone has been cleaned really well. This is a process called Frenching that we'll learn at a later date. And it's got all this subcutaneous fat and marbling all throughout. And that's what makes a ribeye so flavorful and so juicy. Also here, we have a New York strip that has a lot of marbling in it and a fat cap on the outside. Generally, you want to trim that fat cap to about 1/4 inch so that you don't have too much fat and your grill doesn't catch on fire. One thing I want to do here is I want to season these guys up and I'm going to grill them. I'm going to show you guys how to get the good grill marks on there, and then we're going to put them on the grill. And you guys are going to see what a medium rare steak looks like cut into. So first, we're going to go ahead and season these up. I'm using avocado oil. You could use olive oil, vegetable oil, grapeseed oil, whatever your jam is. I personally prefer avocado. It has a high smoke point, so it can get really, really hot before it overheats. And lots of pepper. You can put any sort of Creole seasoning, fresh garlic, fresh herbs, whatever your choice is. Lots of good kosher salt, really packing it on there because these are thick cuts of meat, right? So you're only seasoning the outside. It needs to have enough seasoning that when you eat it all the way through, that you are still getting some of that flavor. Again, putting a little oil on this side as well. More pepper and salt. And a generous coating of kosher salt. I'm using a coarse kosher salt, okay? Our HUD vent is cut on, so I'm going to talk a little bit louder. Before we move on to the grilling process, I am going to show you guys how to tie the Chateaubriand. So here we have butcher's twine, okay? So you would cut off what you need. I always cut a little extra because it's easier to have more to work with than not enough. And so I'm going to start with that. I've got my end of the tenderloin that we're using for the Chateaubriand. And you first have to make a tie from underneath and an initial knot, which we're going to do right up here at the end. Making it nice and tight to hold all that together. And so then you come down the center and take your finger and loop it around and go around the meat and come back through and pull it through. You do the same thing here. You skip a little space, wrap it around your finger, loop it through, making sure it's nice and tight each time. And then from here you take it and you go underneath the string and tie it at the very top. And so now we have a nice, tightly tied piece of meat that's going to cook evenly all the way through. And then of course after you cook it, you remove the string before slicing after it's rested, because you never want to put anything on the plate that's not edible. Okay, and now we're going to transition to our grill. I've got my students here today, so if you guys all want to come right over here so you can see, that would be great. So what I have in this pan is a rolled up towel with some fresh oil, okay? And I'm going to use this to oil the grill. My meat is oiled and that's going to keep it from sticking. And I'm going to leave this right here for today, and you guys can use that all throughout the grilling process. So I've got a really hot grill, okay? I'm going to start with my tomahawk ribeye first. And I'm going to place it presentation side down on the grill, just like that. My grill is nice and hot so that I'm getting a good sear, okay? Also, the same thing with our New York strip. The tomahawk is huge, y'all. This is a couple of pounds of meat with the bone and the thickness of the meat. So it's going to be important that you let it sit there for a little bit longer. One of the goals is to get the nice grill marks on the outside, and we're going to do that by making a quarter turn, but we're going to let it sit there for a few minutes. Our strip is going to cook way faster, okay? It is our natural tendency to want to pick up the meat and check it. Don't. Let it do its thing, okay? Have y'all ever tried to like flip a hamburger patty or a piece of sausage in a pan and it was stuck and it wouldn't come up, and you finally get it up and it like ripped off part of the surface of the meat? It will naturally unstick. Let the meat do its thing on the heat and it will naturally unstick when it's ready to be flipped. If the surface and the product is oiled well, then you'll be fine. So don't worry about that. It's our natural tendency to say, okay, I gotta flip it. Hold your horses, okay? I want y'all to come look and see how just from this small amount of fat, it's okay if you're in the, you can see the flame starting to kind of come up. So if I had even more fat on that, Elijah, Justin, y'all come see, my grill would almost be catching on fire. So that's why it's so important to trim that fat cap to 1/4 of an inch. The strip is going to go about 6 minutes, so 3 or so minutes on each side. So at about 2 minutes, I'm going to turn it a quarter turn so that I get those nice diamond-shaped grill marks, and then we'll flip it to the other side. And while we're waiting on that, I'm going to switch out to a clean board and we'll be right back. Y'all see that flaming up? That's just from the fat melting. One thing I want to talk about while we're standing here waiting is hot spots on your grill. There are going to be spots on your grill that just get hotter and create a better sear or grill marks. It's that way with every grill, okay? So it's important in the restaurant setting to know your equipment and know where your hot spots are, because that's where you're gonna be wanting to put things down for that initial sear to get the good grill marks, and then you can move it over to the side that's not quite as hot so that it can continue to cook, right? So that's why I moved the strip around a little bit, because it wasn't on a hot spot. Okay, so we see we're beginning to get some of the grill marks there. I'm gonna go ahead and turn it, just so it's not overcooked. From the fat. Okay, y'all see the good grill marks? So now we're gonna turn it a quarter turn, press it down so we get that nice diamond shape. And you can see the diamonds there. This ribeye is huge, so it's obviously gonna take 10 or so minutes to cook, okay? And generally, you know, in a restaurant world where we're cooking 20 to 50 steaks at a time, you could put this on a hot skillet and finish it in the oven after you flipped it to make more room on your grill to put down new orders. Say it were a super busy Friday or Saturday night. So you can always finish a steak in the oven if you need the grill space. So if you're gonna put it in the oven to finish it, it needs to be at like 425. How do y'all want to eat the strip? Y'all want it rare? Y'all want it medium rare? Medium rare? Almost there. Still a little rare, so we're gonna let it go about a minute and a half longer. And eventually y'all will be able to take your tongs and squeeze the side and know what that feels like, or even press on the top. But that just takes time and practice. Okay, I'm gonna flip our tomahawk. Look how pretty that is. Y'all wanna come over and look? What now? Generally no. It'll kind of melt and do all that throughout the process. This is gonna be on here for 10 or so minutes. So you can if you want to. You don't have to. I generally don't. The reality of that is if you're at home and you're standing over your skillet and you can hold it, that works. But in the kitchen, you can't hold 20 steaks on their side to melt the fat. But that automatically naturally happens a lot of times with the flame coming up around it, so you don't have to do that. Okay, so now we've got a beautiful strip here. It's very important to let your meat rest, okay? And to let all those juices reabsorb into the steak before you cut it. If you don't, when you slice it, all those juices will run out, okay? When you slice meat, you always want to slice it on the bias against the grain so it makes a pretty cut. So we're going to do that here. I'm using a chef's knife and I'm slicing at an angle, and I've got a beautiful, rare steak. And as you can see, that's what we're looking at. Very nice. Thank you so much for joining us for our demo today, and we hope you join us again next time.